Two guests, Kapil Sibal, former Foreign Secretary, and Lalit Mansingh, former Foreign Secretary. We're going to touch on some of those issues in the next 20 minutes. Pick them carefully. Clearly, we can't cover all the subjects the Prime Minister covered, but I do want to touch on some of the more important ones, as well as the fact that for large parts, or at least seemingly large parts, the Prime Minister seemed also to be speaking extempore, even using some of the rhetoric that he often uses in India when he said, "Chodo yaro, kuch hone wala nahi." I'd wonder what the UN General Assembly made of that sort of comment. Let's begin, Kamal Sibal, with what the Prime Minister said in response, seemingly in response to Nawaz Sharif. I'm going to do something that journalists ought not to. I'm going to phrase my comment as praise for Mr. Modi and ask you to either agree or disagree, because that might be a novel way of doing it. We anticipated, or we discussed, that he'd take it up headfront. He would actually talk about what Nawaz Sharif talked about and either respond and contradict it or dismiss it. In fact, he ignored what Mr. Nawaz Sharif said. I don't think Mr. Modi even mentioned Kashmir except in connection with the floods. Instead, what he did was to say how he wanted friendship with his neighbors, how he wanted friendship with Pakistan in particular, how he wanted bilateral talks. There was an allusion to saying raising issues at the UN is not sufficient, but that's about it. And what he said was, abjure terror so we can talk. Do you think that this response was perhaps the most effective response, because he stood by what he wanted to say and didn't get deflected by Nawaz Sharif's content, and yet he's replied to Nawaz Sharif but done it very cleverly?
I would agree with you. I think the approach that he decided to take was, in the event, absolutely the right one. He did it very cleverly. He rose above the kind of contentious way with which Nawaz Sharif raised the Kashmir issue. And he brought the humanitarian aspect also, talking about the victims of the floods in Kashmir, how Government of India has done its best to come to their assistance, and also had offered such assistance to those who had been victims of the floods in Pakistan too. So I think it was very clever, it was well done, and he clearly sent a signal that insofar as India is concerned, India is not going to engage with Pakistan in a tit-for-tat, especially on this forum. And that's
the most important thing.
Yes.
There was no tit-for-tat, no tu-tu-meme, no trading of charges, which the world is fed up of India and Pakistan
but
doing.
he underlined, of course, that Pakistan has to abjure terrorism to allow the dialogue to proceed.
But en passant almost. He didn't labor the point. He said...
No, he didn't.
He simply mentioned it in the bigger context of saying he wanted friendship with his neighbors, he wanted friendship with Pakistan, he said bilateral talks with Pakistan is important, and en passant he said, but of course, terror can't come in the way. Right? Making it clear to the audience as well as to people in India that his concern with Pakistani terror is there, but he didn't labor the point.
Yes.
You, however, had said earlier that you thought it was important for the record, I think that was your language, that the Prime Minister must respond. He didn't respond for the record at all.
He did. I think if you put his various strands together, he did respond. He started by saying that there is a wave of democracy in our neighborhood. I believe in our neighborhood. I have worked for friendship with the neighborhood. And then he said that certain issues were raised in this forum. I don't think raising it in this forum is going to resolve the issue.
But that's it. And it was just one sentence.
And we are ready to have a dialogue.
Precisely. And the emphasis was on friendship and dialogue and sorting it out bilaterally.
Yes.
In which context, there were two en passant thoughts. Raising it at the UN isn't the right way.
That's right.
But he didn't actually say what was raised at the UN. He just alluded to it.
Yes.
And secondly, the other thing was terror mustn't come in the way.
That's
so
right.
he actually, as Kamal Sibal said, rose above Nawaz Sharif to almost dismiss Nawaz Sharif.
Sure.
Would you accept that there was a certain dismissiveness?
I think he did it. But you know, the speech itself was a bit diffused.
I'll come to that in a moment's time. Let's come to the overall impression of the speech in a moment's time, because I saw that when you were listening to it, you were very concerned about the diffusion. The second important thing is that he did present in that speech something that you never hear third world leaders do, but you frequently hear first world Western leaders do, a sort of tour d'horizon of the world in terms of the advance of democracy. He literally went through the world, Africa, West Asia, Latin America, our own neighborhood. He identified India with the advance of democracy, he praised it, and he gave the world an overview, a tour d'horizon. That was unique. No Indian Prime Minister, no third world Prime Minister has ever done that before.
Yes, I think he said that, but that was not the major element in his speech.
No, that was the starting point.
That was the starting point, and I think he's been saying this in Japan. He spoke a lot about democracy and the values which bring India and Japan together. So unlike some of our previous prime ministers, he is talking about democracy being one of the principles to which India is deeply attached. But there is no hint here that he is in any way going to participate in any crusade for democracy. And that's where he distinguished himself from Western leaders. He is not talking about democracy as something which consciously India is going to promote.
So he's a champion but not a proselytizer.
Yes, absolutely.
You are very concerned about the need to take a moral position on ISIL. Now, what Mr. Modi did do, if I understand correctly, is take a very strong moral position on the need for the world together to battle terror. He spoke extensively about West Asia, but he never actually spoke about ISIL per se.
That's right.
Was that a mistake?
Well, I think in his judgment that was enough. That
But
was
in your
adequate.
judgment?
In my judgment, he would have been a taller global leader if he had mentioned this. And
So
certainly,
in your judgment, leaving it out is a mistake?
in the sense that India is accused of not taking a stand and therefore not being ready to play a global role. To that extent, people will say, we told you so. India is not ready.
In fact, to take your point further, he spoke in the early part of his speech as a great champion of democracy,
Right.
not a proselytizer, but a champion. But then when it came to terror, he fell short of identifying ISIL, which is an international concern on terror. Is there a sort of contradiction? You champion democracy, but you're not as outspoken on terror as you could and should be.
Well, I think he was being cautious. And for somebody who has not been exposed to foreign policy, this being his first on a global stage, he was being cautious. Remember that the Foreign
cautious
Office...
or a certain lack of confidence?
No,
Maybe I should go so far.
I think, the Foreign Office doesn't like democracy to be used as an element of foreign policy, because we think it's liable to be misused. The Americans are always inviting us to join them in spreading democracy, but they have a selective view of democracy.
But there's a very interesting corollary to what you're saying. Therefore, that early part of the speech where he was championing democracy and he came up with this international tour d'horizon of where democracy was faring in the world, the Foreign Office would have been a little unhappy with that.
No, I think he did the right thing in stepping a few inches beyond what the Foreign Office would have advised him.
This is Modi's own touch to the speech.
This is Modi's own touch, and it suits him to say, I have been elected by 1.3 billion people. I speak for the developing countries of the world, and therefore I must be taken seriously. India must be taken seriously. It's a good point to make.
There was, right at the end, a fairly substantial section. It seemed to last for 5 minutes, but I didn't actually time it, on International Yoga Day.
Yes.
And it sounded as if he was teaching the world about yoga. Was that essential and necessary and therefore welcome, or did you think that's the point at which this place...
There's nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that.
Because yoga has become immensely popular all over the world. And many countries are now claiming yoga as if yoga was invented
But
by
the
them.
Prime Minister of India at the UN General Assembly on yoga?
He's talking about International Yoga Day. So he's going beyond simply talking about yoga, but he's saying the world should celebrate yoga and have an International Yoga Day. And I think that helps build up India's soft power or soft image.
I think this is where you felt the speech went diffuse.
No, I think there's nothing wrong in that. Remember, if you read the BJP...
Where did you think the speech went diffuse?
No, I tell you, if you read the BJP manifesto, it talks about India's traditional wisdom, this feeling of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, and everything comes out here. Soft power, India's soft power. India has a message. That's what Mr. Modi has been saying.
I stopped you earlier when you wanted to make the point that the speech got diffuse.
Yes.
Where did it get diffuse?
It got diffuse because he was jumping from subject to subject, sometimes repeating himself. Let us all work together and fight against terrorism. He said it at several points in his speech. Let us all work together and make the world a better place. Said it in different places. So, since he didn't have a scripted speech, or maybe he didn't follow it, he was jumping from subject to subject, and it seemed as if he was losing focus. What earlier prime ministers had done, and this was again the convention, you focus on 5, 6, 7, 8 broad points in your multilateral foreign policy. Now, in this, what has been lost is a lot of specifics, like are we in favor of the WTO agreement?
It wasn't mentioned.
It wasn't mentioned. Are we in favor of a global agreement on climate change? He spoke about climate change, didn't say anything about a global agreement. Are we interested in nuclear disarmament? He didn't mention it at all. A lot of the global issues got missed out because this is the forum for global issues.
Let me put this to you. Did they get missed out because this was a speech in large parts extempore, and therefore when you go extempore, you tend to lose focus, you tend to lose structure, and since you rely on oratory to carry you through, it becomes a different speech. Is that why these important issues got left out? Or did they get left out because he consciously chose to leave them out, which could be another explanation?
Yeah, sure. I think he would have said, I don't want to follow the trodden path. I want to make my own style clear. This is how I speak, this is how I communicate. These are my fundamental beliefs, and this is what I'm telling you. It's fine. It's okay for a prime minister to say that. But sometimes people say, what did he say about reform of the UN? He said so. He said it needs to be expanded, but in sort of in a broader context.
In fact, I was going to bring that up. I'm very glad you touched on that. Beyond saying it needs to be reformed,
yes,
and beyond saying that there are old promises that need to be fulfilled, actually the word Security Council and reform of Security Council was never said.
No, he did mention.
But en passant, then again.
He mentioned the Security Council
also.
But it was closed in a kind of rhetoric saying, we started with 51 and there are 119 flags fluttering on this building.
Absolutely, that's it.
Yeah, that's rhetorical.
But that's actually General Assembly.
But
when he says 51 and 193, he's talking about the General Assembly.
Did talk about, in passing, about the need to expand the UN Security
Do you
Council.
think here he should have been more specific, more precise, rather than, as Mr. Mansingh was saying, diffuse and en passant?
Well, he wanted to treat this speech at a philosophical level in so many ways, which is why one feels that maybe he didn't very specifically focus on some of the issues that have been figuring in our speeches earlier and which are on our agenda in terms of the United Nations. So which is why he spoke about, and he laid out in fact an agenda for 70 years of
Can I
UN.
stop you there? As a former foreign secretary who's written speeches for prime ministers at the UN, and as a diplomat who knows how important it is to use this platform to put across clear-cut messages, did the Prime Minister err in being philosophical rather than precise?
No, I don't think so, because each man of course has his style, and I think he came across well when he spoke in philosophical terms, but I would like to emphasize.
Just a moment, before you do you agree or disagree?
I agree that each Prime Minister must set his own style, but the fundamental issue is, this is the forum. If you don't raise it in this forum, then where else?
So here then, choosing to be philosophical and not precise was a bit of a mistake.
Yeah, because this speech he can make at the Red Fort, he can make it at Madison Garden, but there are essential elements in our foreign policy that are important, that are a priority.
Which were left unsaid.
Which were left unsaid, and therefore I'm a little disappointed.
You're a little disappointed?
Yes.
In other words, this was not as good a speech as it could have been and should have been.
It could have been focused, it could have been compressed, it would have received greater clarity, made people understand better where India stands on multilateral issues.
In a sense,
this
then,
is what
he
I
didn't
emphasize.
live up to the great occasion.
No, this is a multilateral forum. I think Mr. Modi didn't appreciate that this is a multilateral forum where you focus on multilateral issues. There are many other occasions where you can speak.
You're saying a very important thing. Did Mr. Modi not appreciate this is a multilateral forum where a particular type of speech is required and what you can say at the Red Fort and Madison Square Gardens won't work here? Or did his advisors fail to tell him that? Because that's another possibility. Or did he overrule his advisors, which prime ministers have a right to do, and get it wrong?
It doesn't matter. It was his decision to use this as a forum.
And in your eyes, he got it slightly wrong.
I mean, my preference would have been for focusing on issues, but as I said, every prime minister has the sovereign right to decide what his speech
Absolutely. Mr. Man Singh, even though he's used diplomatic terminology, he said it with the ever-present smile on his face, has actually been quite critical of Mr. Modi's speech, and he actually said he is disappointed. How much of that do you disagree with?
I disagree with that, because in the past our prime ministers have been specific about things, and they have conformed themselves to the way the Foreign Office lays out our priorities, what should be said in the United Nations. But where has it taken us? Supposing he had again emphasized a great deal about the need for UN reforms and how, but he did say that actually 20th century way of looking at things is not going to address the problems.
That's a very indirect way of saying it.
Yeah. Therefore, he put it in a wider general context, and I think it's good. It is more dignified rather than lobbying for it and saying that we must be part of the expanded UN Security Council or seem to be indirectly lobbying for that. He's putting it in the way,
There's a very
of general
interesting
principles.
spin you're putting on it. You're saying this is more dignified than lobbying more directly.
Yes.
But is there not a danger that the pursuit of dignity may have come at the cost of precision and clarity of message?
Everybody understands what he means. Everybody understands what he means when all he has to say is reform the United Nations, reform the UN Security Council. We are aspirants to be permanent members. We are part of the G4. So the message goes across. He doesn't have to spell it out in any great detail. That's not going to strengthen his case.
We're running out of time. Both of you are not just former foreign secretaries, but you have a sense of history and perspective. You've seen many Indian prime ministers on that platform presenting India's message to the world, often at times where India's voice was needed more critically to be understood and heard. Mr. Modi is lucky India is not in that position any longer. We're now a country which is recognized. There were earlier occasions when India's voice wasn't recognized and the Prime Minister's message became even more important. How does Mr. Modi's performance today compare with earlier performances? Let's just pick randomly 2-3 Prime Ministers. 10 years of Manmohan Singh, Narasimha Rao, Vajpayee. How does he compare with those three?
That's a bit unfair, because earlier prime ministers followed a scripted policy. Mr. Modi has made a change.
But in following a scripted policy, did they end up serving India's purpose better than Mr. Modi did?
I feel that if you don't have pointed references to issues and are clear on where you stand, because that's where people will ask you, where does India stand on Afghanistan?
And we don't know.
We don't know. Mr. Modi talked about the situation around us.
He didn't actually mention the word Afghanistan.
Afghanistan.
He mentioned Afghanistan.
He did?
He did? But you're the only one who heard it. Neither of us did.
I probably missed it. But the point is...
But the message wasn't clear.
He
talked about...
We're running out of time.
He talked about Afghanistan and a resolution of the problem.
You may be right.
I expected Mr. Modi to stand there and say, India is now a global player and we have a viewpoint on the major issues facing the world. He referred to many of them
but he didn't stitch it up.
He didn't stitch it up. Yeah.
How would you compare Mr. Modi to the three predecessors before him performing on that same platform? Vajpayee, Narasimha Rao, Manmohan Singh.
In terms of style, confidence and self-assurance, he has certainly performed far better than our previous prime ministers.
Okay.
To have the courage to intersperse his speech with extempore passages.
You give him a lot of courage for that.
A great deal of self-confidence, because you are speaking to the international audience, the most exposed international audience on the platform, and there you are confident you will not say anything that is wrong.
I end by simply summing the two of you up by saying this: you're clearly an admirer, you're somewhat more of a critic, but I respect both your views, and I'm very glad that we have this contrast in opinions, because it will help the audience not only see the speech through two different perspectives, but also to decide between themselves which of the two of you they agree with. My thanks to both of you for coming in and spending time with us and analyzing Mr. Modi's maiden speech at the UN. And there we end this special episode of To The Point. We're going to carry on after the break with more coverage from New York with the rest of the team. But for me, goodbye, good night.